The Beginning of World War II from A Little History of the United States by James West. The first question is, what was happening in Germany as the United States was in the Great Depression and as FDR was becoming president? A global war. The day after Franklin Roosevelt was sworn in as president, March 5, 1933, Germany voted to choose its own legislator, the Reichstag. Elections had been called by the new Chancellor, Adolf Hitler. Several times, he had tried to sweep his National Socialist or Nazi Party into power and fallen short. This election was different. In a brutal campaign, the party's military-style gangs, the Brown Shirts, attacked the rallies of opponents and beat up their leaders. The Nazis won control of the Reichstag, which then passed an act giving Hitler the power to make any law he pleased. As Roosevelt worked with Congress on the New Deal, Adolf Hitler became a dictator who spoke of purifying Germany and strengthening it. His people needed land, Lebensraum, he called it, room to live. Caught in the midst of their own Great Depression, few Americans paid heed. Yet within 7 years, Hitler brought Europe and the world to a new war, one so immense that the Great War of 1914 to 1918, or World War I, seemed mild by comparison. 16 million people died in the first war. The new one killed 60 million. So the question, what was happening in Germany as the United States was in the Great Depression and as FDR was becoming president? Next question, why were the following countries mad at the Treaty of Versailles? Germany and Italy and Japan. The forces that made such a war possible had been building for more than a century. As industry and science helped nations grow bigger and more powerful, the so-called big powers raced to control more colonies, more riches, more weapons. World War I was the first smash-up. At its finish, Woodrow Wilson dreamed of a peace to end all wars, with the League of Nations to resolve future disputes. But the Treaty of Versailles, signed to end the war, satisfied no one. Germany was angry at being forced to pay billions of dollars to the victors. Italy and Japan, whose soldiers fought on the winning side, complained that they had not received their fair share of rewards. Great Britain and France, on the other hand, had lost hundreds of thousands of young men in battle. The last thing the leaders of these democracies wanted was to be dragged into another war. So, question, why were the following countries mad at the Treaty of Versailles? Germany and Italy and Japan. Next question, what did isolationists want? The United States was just as determined to avoid war. Those who agreed became known as isolationists. In truth, most Americans shared this view. It became harder to turn inward as the world slid towards the war. When Japan invaded China's province of Manchuria and the League of Nations objected, the members of Japan's delegation simply walked out. "We are not coming back," they announced. Germany withdrew too, demonstrating that the League's fine words had no force. So, question, what did isolationists want? Next question, what event led to World War II? Soon, Italy invaded Ethiopia and North Africa, and Japan unleashed an attack to gain more of China. Hitler marched newly organized armies right up to the borders of France and sent other troops to occupy Austria. The European democracies might have blocked him if they had stepped in early. "We would have had to withdraw with our tails between our legs," Hitler admitted privately. But memories of the Great War remained too strong in Britain and France. At a meeting in Munich, Hitler promised he would not grab any more land if he were allowed to occupy a part of Czechoslovakia where many German-speaking people lived. Britain and France agreed to appease Hitler one more time, and Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain returned to London announcing that he had achieved peace in our time. It took only 6 months before Hitler broke his promise and took the rest of Czechoslovakia. Another 6 months and he invaded Poland. This time, France, Britain, and Poland declared war, leading the Allied forces, which would eventually grow to over 20 nations, against the Axis powers, primarily Germany, Italy, and Japan. So, question, what event led to World War II? And you can answer this one too. What countries were on the Allied powers and Axis powers? The United States did not join the fight. Wave after wave of German planes bombarded London and other English cities. The new Prime Minister, Winston Churchill, begged for American ammunition, planes, and the loan of 40 or 50 of your old destroyers. But Roosevelt's generals worried that if Germany invaded and conquered Britain, American warships and other goods would fall into Nazi hands. Better to fortify America and leave Britain to fight alone. Roosevelt disagreed, and the ships went over, helping the English in some small way to win their dogged Battle of Britain. Hitler gave up his plans for invasion. Next question. What did Japan want during this time? In the end, the stroke that brought the United States into the war came from an entirely different direction. Japan had long watched with envy as the British, French, Dutch, and even the Americans acquired colonies in Asia. Why shouldn't Japan do the same? Southeast Asia was much more its home territory than it was Europe's or America's. As Germany and Italy won victories in Europe, Japan secretly launched a fleet eastward across the Pacific. It was commanded by Admiral Isoroku Yamato, and its mission was to attack the key U.S. naval base at Pearl Harbor in Hawaii. Years earlier, Yamamoto had lived for a time in Washington as a naval diplomat, where he had gained a reputation for being a sharp poker player. In truth, the raid on Pearl Harbor was much like a high-stakes poker game. If successful, the gamble would pay off immensely. But there was a risk. The admiral well understood that the United States was such a large nation with so much industrial might that it could build up its armies and navies and fight back to the bitter end. So what did Japan want during this time? Last question, what day did FDR proclaim a day that will live in infamy, and why? On December 7th, 1941, Pearl Harbor was caught unawares. Japan bombers sank 8 battleships, killed 2,400 men, and damaged 300 aircraft. Roosevelt proclaimed the day a date that will live in infamy, and 4 days later, Hitler and Mussolini of Italy declared war on the United States. America would now fight in a global war they had hoped to avoid. So, what day did FDR proclaim a day that will live in infamy, and why?